I think we're going live. Okay, it says we're live, so we're live. So, hello, everybody who's tuning in on YouTube and for everybody who's on the podcast listening in. Thanks for being here. I'm super excited, super honored to be joined by Missy, the VP of Marketing from Ripple. I know about Ripple only because I've grown up going to Colorado and y'all have been one of the longest standing brands operating in the state. But for our listeners, let's start out with what is Ripple and how did you get connected to the brand, and just give us like all, the details of who, what, when, where, why, whenever you're ready.
For sure. I'll give you the long version since I think we have a little bit of time.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you for having me, Shayda.
Absolutely.
So Ripple itself is a water-soluble, dissolvable THC and CBD powder. We have since released other cannabinoids as well as we've evolved with the industry, but basically it is a product to make anything an edible. When we first got into the industry, so I myself am a former journalist. I wanted to work for magazines my whole life, ended up working for a magazine, moving out to Colorado with my husband. And a friend of mine from growing up in Michigan approached me and said, I have an idea for a cannabis business I want to start in Colorado. Will you help us license it? And I said, absolutely not. That sounds terrible. It's not what I'm doing. It's not what I'm about. And this was, back in 2013. So just before Colorado went rec. And I myself did not grow up smoking. I had a couple of times. It never really agreed with me, didn't really know what was going on, didn't mind that other people did it, but it just wasn't something that I was super into. So I didn't know how I could benefit from it. That initial product that we ended up launching was a microdose tea. It was a product that was meant to relax, not to intoxicate. It was still water tea, had 2.5 milligrams of THC with either organic mint, green, or black tea. And it was very much that sort of after work unwind, for the person who's drinking a glass of wine at night. And that I could connect with, and that I got, and I thought there is so much opportunity in this market for something like that because I've never seen it. I didn't know anything like that existed at the time. And at the time, it really didn't. And in order to make the tea, we had to make a water soluble form of THC because we didn't want you to have the experience. We had the oil slick sitting on the top of the cup. So we worked with some chemists here in Colorado to develop the initial formulation of that water soluble THC. And at the time, it was just going into the tea. We were making these tea stick infusers. They had little holes all on the bottom, and you would use it as your infuser for your tea, and you could stir the product around in your cup. And it was wonderful. And one of my other co-founders and I started doing all of our in-store vendor days and talking to prospective consumers, talking to bud tenders. And there were so many people who were saying similar things, which were either that dose will do nothing for me, or that sounds great. I don't drink tea. I don't care. And after a couple months of that, we thought, well, we don't have to stick with microdose. We can go to where the market is now, which was the full dose 10 milligrams here in Colorado. And also, we've created this water soluble form of THC. If people don't like tea, they can put it in whatever they want. They can make anything they want an edible. Their favorite food, now an edible. So about 6 months after we launched the initial Stillwater tea product in Colorado, we launched the first incarnation of Ripple and also Whitewater tea, which was the 10 milligram version of our tea. And Ripple just took off. It became the best-selling beverage SKU in Colorado because dissolvables weren't a category. It wasn't a thing that existed. So everybody just kind of stuck them in with the beverages. And then the teas we had up and running for the better part of 3-4 years, and we ended up discontinuing them just because Ripple was what the company was known for. And that was sort of the thing that everybody could get behind because they recognized, hey, here's a product that is consistent, and we can get to that in a moment, but a consistent product that I can use however I want. So it very much fit with the ethos of what we were starting, which was that we wanted to build this lifestyle product. We wanted to show people that cannabis could be used in different ways. And while we thought that that was only with microdose when we were starting out, the industry obviously just hasn't gotten there yet. It's taken much longer than we thought to sort of bring in those consumers that could benefit from the plant, but just are reticent. They're not quite here. And yeah, and have something that people could use every day in different formats, morning, noon, night.
I really appreciated you sharing that history, which is partially like why the podcast is so fun for me, because I have a view of a brand, and obviously people can read, the about me's or the Wikipedia if it exists to some extent, but getting to hear from someone who's, part of the brand in your own words is just so impactful. And like I shared, I grew up going to Colorado, and you touched on it a little bit too. The product that Ripple is as a dissolvable powder, like nobody was doing that. That was so new. I remember seeing it and thinking like, I could just put the powder on my tongue. Like I can put the powder in like whatever drink I want. And now you're seeing that application, if I can, adopted broadly. Like there's products in California that are very similar. I'm sure in other states operating as well, but listeners, as y'all should know, cannabis is very isolated state by state. So as Colorado being your marketplace, that was like crazy to me to see back then. I say back then as if it was like, forever ago, but I'm sure time has been really, drawn out for you just being in the industry as long as you've been, especially with the brand. But what I wanted to call out, which I think is really smart, and especially, for people trying to navigate the cannabis industry, your original idea or your original product is not what you're presently doing. We're not in that, expression, right? Like that expression has evolved. And I think that that is so smart and so needed in our industry is, yeah, look at your SKUs, talk to people going into these environments, both from a consumer perspective. What are consumers saying? How are consumers using your product even? How are the bud tenders selling it? What are they asking or feeling or listening to when consumers are trying to interact with them. And so I think those are really important conversations to be happening as we're trying to evolve and stay up with the industry. And so kind of going into that, you were talking about consistency, and also if we can, evolve, you now have other SKUs beyond just the dissolvable powder. You have introduced edible gummies onto the marketplace. And so I'm curious how you want, I guess, approach consistency, because before we were hitting record, we were talking about the need for consistency, but also the reality when you're talking about the cannabis plant, like, yes, the same cultivator can grow it in the same conditions with the same, inputs, but it can still have variability. And I think when you're looking at it from a consumer perspective who doesn't maybe fully understand cannabis, they're like, why does this product, not work the exact same as it did last month when I bought it? And so having that conversation is, I think, happening more frequently as the industry goes more mainstream. And certainly there are solutions, and I'm going to call them kind of technologies. That's how I refer to them here on the podcast. So, nano emulsification, things that allow for better absorption, which can then produce a more consistent effect. And so I'd love for you to touch on how consistency is replicated through Ripple products, as well as how you have leaned into other products in the marketplace with this technology.
Absolutely. So for consistency, when we launched that initial tea product, we had people approaching us often saying, I feel high quicker with your product than I do with other products. And we felt the same things, but we didn't know why. And we really wanted to understand why. So we took on what was our first clinical study. So testing the absorption rates of Ripple in humans. It was a really small study. We just wanted to see if what we were feeling would play out in the bloodstream. So we got a phlebotomist, and we had everybody take 10 milligrams of Ripple on an empty stomach. And they also had abstained from THC for a couple of days. We had a washout period to see what the effects would be. And within 15 minutes, that first study, Ripple was absorbed into the bloodstream. So we thought, shoot, like this is the problem that has plagued edibles to this point, is people would eat them and not understand when they were going to feel an effect. So then you eat more, and then you have a horrible experience. Then you have the Maureen Dowd New York Times piece. So from that, we wanted to take it further. We didn't see anybody else in the industry who was studying their products, studying the product's effects in humans. And we thought that was super important for the message that we wanted to tell. We knew we had created this product that was super versatile, that anybody could incorporate into their day, but we wanted to sort of show them what to expect And we didn't just want to tell them, we wanted to come from a place of truth. That's always been very important to us in terms of adoption of the brand and the product, that we were truth tellers in the industry. A quick side note, there was somebody who had approached us very early on when we were in the initial stages of setting up the company, who had said, why don't you just put shake in a bag? It'll sell. We thought, well, that's not what we're trying to do here. We see this industry as being something super important, and there is a definite opportunity to lift it up and to sort of shed that stigma that's been present for so long, for so many reasons. And so it's been very important for us to do this work. So then we ended up embarking on a study with Colorado State University, pharmacokinetics. So again, the absorption of a product into the bloodstream. And that study found that Ripple was absorbed within 10 minutes. We ran similar studies with CBD products just to show how our technology, as you mentioned, how we sort of carry the cannabinoids, the particle size, so not just that it is a small particle size, but an exact particle size, how the different carrier ingredients and the particle sizes can affect the absorption. And then we recently, last year, put out another study with our THC products showing that our products were 2 times faster than the leading gummy product here in Colorado. It's been, I think, both a blessing and a curse, because we are still one of the only companies in the industry doing this work. Bud tenders don't really know the difference between somebody just telling a story and somebody having published research. And other brands can kind of be a bit combative about it. We're not trying to take anybody else out. We're just trying to give consumers and bud tenders a lens with which to view our product. Hey, we know that we're absorbed within 10 minutes. Hey, we know that our product's absorbed 2 times faster than your best selling product. So that is a piece of consistency, is knowing how fast. Then there is the actual manufacturing aspect of it. So we have created GMP certified facilities where you know that everything that is happening in there is the same level of consistency and structure as what's happening in your general, in your consumer packaged goods, in the things that you buy off the shelf at a grocery store. We are paying very close attention to the fact that things are clean, they are consistently manufactured, and they are going out as they should be. They are tested, they are regulated. And then a separate piece of all of that is making sure that the messaging and the way that we are talking about the product, the way that we are presenting the product, is consistent. So it's basically something that our consumers can rely on. They know that with every Ripple product, those same value propositions carry over. They know that they're getting the same effect, the same experience. Something interesting about water solubility, you mentioned having a consistent effect for the consumer, is that if you have a traditional edible, it's fat soluble. So anything that you ate that day, anything that you did that day can affect your absorption of that edible. With Ripple, much less so, because you're starting to absorb it before you're actually metabolizing it. There's a lot more to unpack within that, but that's sort of how we offer consistency. Then when it comes to the new products, you also had mentioned something about you can just pour Ripple on your tongue. We had a long running consumer survey. So it's now been running for 4 years. We put little survey cards inside of our Ripple containers and ask consumers questions about the products. So many of our consumers were pouring unflavored Ripple onto their tongues that we thought, why don't we just create a product that's meant to pour directly onto the tongue? So we created Quick Sticks, which are flavored versions of Ripple, and they just taste like something versus tasting kind of like nothing. Really fun flavors. All of the Ripple dissolvable products are super portable, so you can just put them in your pocket and take them wherever you want. So many people I know have them in their wallet, like in the little coin purse.
I definitely have some Ripple in my purse right now.
It is a pretty standard place for Ripple, but that portability aspect is huge for the Ripple product. And then gummies being the largest segment of the edibles market, we wanted to add something to that had a reason to exist. And its reason to exist was that it was fast acting. It's the only gummy that's made with Ripple. So here's Ripple, this product that you have come to know and love, and it now is available in a gummy format because people do love that fun candy aspect of cannabis edibles. And while Ripple is gluten-free, vegan, sugar-free, fits most any diet, any lifestyle, sometimes you just want a gummy. So we wanted to bring something to market where people could have Ripple in any form that they were really looking for.
I think it is so remarkable when you look at the data. It's both good and bad, right? Where you're like, come on, we're making, innovation happen. We're bringing new ways to consume to market. And people are like, no, I just want a gummy. Like at the end of the day, I just want it enrobed in sugar. It's just like, okay, fine, we'll make gummies for you guys. No, you shared so much that I want to circle back around because this is where my brain is going. And if I'm too forward, let me know. But just the timeline of things, again, reflecting on where the market has come and kind of gone from a Colorado perspective, y'all's technology is so forward thinking that yes, now it's more adopted. You're seeing more brands kind of, figure it out. And it's not that it was rocket science necessarily, but I'm really curious, how did you, you mentioned you were working with these scientists and maybe formulators in the initial phases. How did you even come to the conclusion oh, we can benefit from this technology, or oh, this is going to be a differentiator for us in the market? Because I think that is such interesting. Obviously, it's the whole, not even just it's your brand is built around this component, this technology. And it just, to me, I'm like, how do you get there? How do you decide, hey, this is what we're going to invest in? And then kind of a secondary question to that, which is a little bit on, I guess the investment side. How did you decide, okay, we're going to invest in this to bring someone on who's going to help us formulate this or do this science experiment to see what is capable with the cannabis plant? And then also wanted to give you some, kudos to then investing in these studies, which is very foreign for our industry and it should be done more frequently. But I think there's a big, you're talking about, I'm like, I would love to do that, but how do I do that? So that's the question, right? It's how do you step into these solutions financially, even just philosophically? How do you get there? How are you what, this makes sense? And maybe it's a large sum of money that goes into it, but obviously this is the outcome that we're going for. So yes, we're going to make this investment that this will be the outcome for us. But I just think, again, it's such a unique thing that y'all are doing that is not being done. And so I'm just curious, how did you get there, to those points?
Yeah. So we were very lucky early on. We had an advisor when we were just starting to set up the company, who ended up joining us as one of our first sort of full-time employees. And he had been in innovation and research at Mars Candy Company for over 2 decades.
Very cool.
So he has been instrumental in sort of showing us the ways of the food world, because none of us have a background or had a background in food or manufacturing. And we were just kind of going out all blindly. And there are a lot of things that happen in everyday food that have not yet been applied to cannabis. And he just looked at it through a food lens. We always saw ourselves as a food company that was using cannabis as an ingredient. And he just solidified that for us. For the actual research component, I think it is a double-edged sword at this point, because it is cost prohibitive. It is expensive. And where I stand now, I am super proud that we have done everything that we've done, and we have marketing messaging that we can stand behind because we know that we are telling the truth. But I don't know that I don't know that it's paid off for us to have invested the kind of money that we have to have found the information that we did. One of the things that we found in our most recent pharmacokinetic study was that formulation matters. So, we spoke a bit about nanoemulsification. Your particle size obviously matters, but your carrier ingredients matter just as much, if not more. So while we are doing this research on our products, we are uncovering things that may not work for other, like if your formulation is not ours, it doesn't matter that you are water soluble because you need to test your product. But, you know, laws being what they are, it is really hard. We had to have the researchers from Colorado State, they would come out in a van every weekend to our facility to administer all of the products that we were testing against. And lots of hours, lots of money, you know, people spending 8 weekends in our facility for hours and hours and hours and not being able to consume cannabis during the week. So we were losing a lot of people to that. And then also just the rigor of the actual study. And that was just one of them. So I think just the barriers to entry are so high. And that's where I see sort of the biggest hurdle is that we need to figure out as an industry, how do we research at less cost? Like, how do we all come together to decide this is important? We want to be able to, we want to know this, whether or not we want to tell other people, we want to know
Right.
what's happening. And it's important for all of us. And like, how do we get that research done?
Yeah,
I think that's
it's so
something that,
foreign.
yeah. And that's why I said, like, I like to feel that as an industry, you know, we are inclusive and we have each other's backs. And sometimes I don't think it feels like that. And, you know, really like we need to help lift each other up. Like I think it's super important, especially where we are right now in Colorado.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that so transparently and candidly because I do think, it is a question that I think needs to be addressed, like you're sharing, right? Like we should all be in pursuit of the same type of research and qualifications just so we know what we are ingesting and consuming. And I love that you were sharing too about this member of your team, one of these early advisors, and his lens of looking at it from a food perspective, and just kind of like that comment, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And yeah, what is happening in food technology and even just like the mass food industry that maybe consumers don't really realize that's why they like certain products, but it's that subconscious, they're hitting on certain umami notes or flavor profiles or the crunch or whatever it might be that is making it more enticing for you to be consuming. And yeah, how do you apply that to cannabis? And not to degrade our own industry, but we were talking before we went live, consumers, the reality is they just want to get high. And I think that as brands, these altruistic, like we want to help people. And it's not that people don't really care about what they're putting in their bodies. I do believe they do. I think that's why you're seeing certain brands, rise above. And also just the 10-year, I think hitting these certain milestones in years is really key too, because people look at us here in Texas and it's like, you got to strap in and hang on. Like it's not, you think you're going to get legalization and you're going to be the brand and it's going to take off and people are going to come. It's like, no. Can you hang in with the market? Can you adapt? Can you introduce new products? Can you get consumer feedback and kind of evolve? But it's all kind of punctuated by this idea of people don't really know what they're going after. And so all these different interval points as the brand incorporated into the bud tender experience incorporated. I mean, I love that you highlighted, which I would love to get into a little bit of the marketing stuff, but inside the packaging, you are actually creating touch points to connect with your consumer, which I know is lost when you are dealing in a regulated market because you cannot sell direct to consumer. So how do you capture that consumer's attention and create some sort of, sounding board back to you, the brand, where usually you're kind of restricted to going through these dispensaries? So it's just very fascinating to kind of hear some of these real life, challenges, because I'm sure people listening, I know I feel a lot of the things that you're expressing and going through too. And so kind of with that, looking at it from a marketing lens, what has been marketing in the industry been like for you? What are some of the channels that you find are most successful? And yeah, how do you create that conversation? I think to the target consumer is what we're all trying to go after, right? It's like, who's that person at the other end of the screen, the counter, the whatever, that is perhaps going to add my product to cart and become a customer? I'm really curious, how y'all look at that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So much of what we have been doing recently outside of those direct to consumer touch points. So, where we are actually able as a brand to speak to our own consumer, the inserts in packaging, QR codes on packaging, anything that we can do in a dispensary setting to capture the attention of a consumer. We've been really honing in on our relationships with our bud tenders because, you spoke to knowing who to sell to or who is that person who comes in. And that's really where the bud tenders are at the front line. So we can teach them more about our products, who we think our products are good for, or how to spot a ripple consumer. And then they can do the work of selling the product to the right person. We would hate for our product to end up in the wrong person's hand because then they don't have the experience that they're looking for. And, to go back to something else that you were talking about, the while people may not understand what's happening in their food stream with the foods that they eat every day, there is a reason that people are turning to cannabis. And we need to do a better job as an industry to meet that consumer's needs. And we are going to see more and more people looking for sort of that natural alternative to whatever the ailment or the function that they're looking for. And so marketing kind of as a brand, there's so much we can say about our product, but it's industry marketing that we need to be doing. So really trying to figure out how we get out to events where it's not necessarily a cannabis event, but something where we would have consumers who might cross over. It was a lot of the work that we were doing pre-pandemic. Pandemic obviously changed everything for us, and we're just starting to get back to it again. But those face-to-face conversations with consumers or potential consumers are super important. And then really the bud tender, engaging the bud tender, letting them know as a brand how we're different, uh, asking how we can help them because at the end of the day, they have a super tough job because people are either coming in there looking at price per milligram, like I just want to get as high as possible, or they are looking for something and they don't know what it is. So yeah, it is tough. We've tried all of the sort of programmatic display, the newsletters. We've tried to engage on pretty much every platform that has ever been presented to us. And really, I think the best work that we can do is the smaller stuff, is making sure that we're having smaller, more meaningful conversations as opposed to, hey, I saw your ad while I was browsing.
Do you find that, and maybe I know the answer, so I'm just asking to hear, from your perspective, but are you able to track and attribute a lot of these activities to building the brand, to dollars sold, to, give some sort of quantification of these efforts? Because I'll share a little bit, from my perspective. I come from events. Prior to getting into cannabis, I did event marketing, and I hated when our executives were like, how successful was that event? And you're like, oh, we met a lot of people. We gave out a lot of swag. They
Felt
loved
great.
us. Like, yeah, like, how many sales did you make? How many emails did you get? And so there is some aspect of like, yes, my brain does understand that, you don't just want to go to things and kind of not know what's working. And so to your comment earlier too, that you just shared about you're kind of trying all these different things. I know that there's not just one thing that moves the needle. You do kind of have to have your pulse. So again, for you listeners who are like looking for the magic pill to like get your brand out into the consumers, world, you have to do all of these things. But maybe a little bit of where I'm coming from too is understanding, again, there's a lot of turnover in this industry. So especially from, let's say, a bud tender perspective, and maybe my observation is incorrect, but I'd be curious your perspective operating in Colorado, this legacy market. It's been, existing for the past, X many years. If that's an avenue for you to get your brand in front of people and there's so much turnover, like how do you actually track, hey, when we go do these activities at this dispensary or at this event, that's actually going to net you the outcome that you're seeking? Or is it kind of just like, well, when I don't do it, it doesn't help. So I do those things and hopefully it's, making an impact in the bottom line.
It's a lot more of the latter for sure. Attribution is horrid. As you know, it's
Yeah.
just because we don't sell online,
Yeah.
we can't really track a consumer to their purchase. There are some emerging technologies that we've been looking into that may allow us to have more of that post-purchase relationship with a consumer. And so that's super intriguing, and we're going to follow that as far as we can. But really, it's just about making sure that we show up and we show up as ourselves. We are telling the right message, and we are there for both the consumers and the bud tenders. And, we have a 4-person field sales specialist team. They are in charge of our vendor days and dispensary visits. And they are at God knows how many pop ups every week, just meeting with consumers and talking about the products. And it's not about how many they sell during the hour or two that they are in a dispensary. It's about having those meaningful conversations. And we can't directly attribute that to product that may be sold once they leave. Sure, we can look at how much was sold when they were there, but there are different avenues where we can see, hey, a store has a spike. What can we attribute that spike to? Oh, well, we did a pop-up there last week, and X bud tender loved chatting with us and really understood the product. And so those are kind of the nuances of it, I guess. But we recognize that we have to be out there for people to know us, because otherwise we're just going to sit on the shelf and the bud tenders aren't going to recommend us and the customer is not going to ask for us.
Yeah, follow up to that. And just from, again, what I've understood, especially about Colorado, my listeners know I spend the most time there. So it's like probably the most, exposed that I can be in terms of like a marketplace that I don't exist in as a brand myself. I know that there's a lot of pay to play with shelf space. We just talked about, a lot of like bud tender turnover. I'm curious how do you handle competition, right? And so when you're looking at some of these same but different, I mean, again, my observation is you guys really were one of the first, if not the first, at least in my mind, to market with this technology that's fast absorbing, and now you see other brands have that same label claim. So competition wise, it's interesting when you're kind of isolated to doing business in a state. You kind of know where the boundaries are. You mentioned you have these X amount of people who are, their job is dedicated to like going into these dispensaries and having these conversations and representing the brand. I'm just curious, do you see other brands doing the same? Do you see the brands that maybe aren't having a shorter life cycle in some of these dispensary situations? To be more candid, with you and the listeners too, I am super fortunate with the podcast, talk to a lot of really great brands all across the United States. And it's like I'm almost prepared for what you're about to say, because I hear it from the big brands. Like, you're a big brand to me. Like, you've been in this industry for longer than most people in your marketplace. And so it's like, how do you stay on top of the competition? How do you stay on top of these touch points for consumers who, quite frankly, they don't know the difference? You know what I mean? And so it's like, I kind of know what you're going to say, but I'm curious from your perspective, because I think people assume, oh, you're that brand and like you have to do these things. It's like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you cannot take your foot off the gas. You will be lost. And I think something that we have done really well is we've tried to stay consistent as a company. Very much a part of what we do, a part of what we represent to the products, but just sort of tried to stay the course because we want to stick around. It's not because we're thriving at all times. It is because we know what it takes to stay, and we have to not be reactionary. I think that's something that has been super important for us, because there is always that new brand coming online that's doing something really crazy, that has a huge marketing budget. We've never had a huge marketing budget. So we are just always trying to figure out what is going to make the most impact with what we have. And staying relevant is tough. We're not new anymore, and we still understand, or we believe that we have a product that has a reason to exist. And I think that's what we're all sort of fighting for. But it is a fight. It is a daily fight to maintain that relevance, to get shelf space where we don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for it, to build the relationships with other dispensaries, not just with the bud tenders, with the managers, with the buyers, and to make sure that people know why we exist and why we deserve to exist.
Do you notice when you like using just the example of like paying to play for shelf space, like do you notice like when you do that placement? And I'll share a quick little personal story, which I did touch on. I think if people listen to the Chiba Chews episode, I went into to a dispensary and I was, if you know me, I love Lightshade. I like shopping at Lightshade. They're like my go-to
We
when I
too
get
love
off the
Lightshade.
airplane. It's like right there, the first little dispensary, just drive a couple minutes. But it's so interesting. It's like I know the environment. I'm very familiar with it. And I see certain products, and I was looking for a product that they had just launched that was not, I guess, not even like on the shelf, but like not at the dispensary at the time either. So like that was a whole separate conversation with them, and it's in the episode. And if you have anything to add to that kind of experience too, I'd love to hear it. Where just because you're a brand and people know you, you might not have certain SKUs at the dispensary just because of all these constraints that they're navigating against. But I was having this conversation with the bud tender, and there's obviously the display, and there's X amount of products in the display. I believe Ripple is in their display, at least was when I was there. And that's just like a view. And then I had to talk to the bud tender. And then of course they have their little computer screen, and they're like, oh, well, if you want to feel this way, or if you're like, oh, you're looking for that type of, disposable vape, whatever, like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't even see that here. I wouldn't even know you had that product if I didn't, ask that question or disclose information that I am searching for. And so I can imagine how that placement could impact sales, because again, consumers, like one of my favorite exercises, and I feel like I talk about it a lot, but I love to reiterate it because it's such good marketing advice. Like go to the grocery store and just look at products that you gravitate towards on the shelf, and then start realizing what's at your eye level, what is, underneath, what's above. And kind of just like understand that, nuance is very intentional. So it looks nuanced to you as the consumer, but it is very intentional to direct your eye to encourage, people to add certain products to cart and things like that. And so the point is, I can tell that those do help when I'm in that environment, but I also realize that it's, just like a component to communicating the benefit and the effect of a brand. And so I don't know if you have anything to add to kind of that experience that I felt as a consumer who very much knows what I'm looking for. But as a brand, it's like, yeah, how do you cut through all that noise to like get that person to realize and recognize, hey, I'm the product that you need.
Yeah, merchandising can be huge. And, some stores are really sophisticated and they have merchandisers, and some are just throwing things up willy-nilly. They don't really care what you have to say. They don't want your displays. They want to do their own thing. And that is super difficult to navigate because, you're talking about a grocery store experience. There are people who are putting things in certain places for a purpose, and you're grouping like items together, and you have that experience of wandering the store, and sort of, especially if it's your local store, where you're going for what thing. You were in a dispensary, you were there one week and you're there the following week, things may be in completely different places, like across the store from where they were. And also you don't have that general browsing experience. You have usually under counter and behind counter, and that tends to be what you're dealing with, except with the exception of some of these newer environments, like in Michigan, where some of the stores have more of a browsing experience.
Mhm.
And so there's standing out as a brand. So what does your packaging look like? What are the display materials looking like? And then there's actually getting that space, whether you have to pay for it, where you have to make the decision, is this store worthy of that spend? And that's a calculation that we make every day. And then, are there other things that we can do that don't involve spend? Is there a way that we can work with the store in product, in credit? How do we get that space? Because it is impactful and it does influence decisions sometimes. But we have also seen in stores where we've had pretty elaborate displays that bud tender says another product and the person walks out with another product. So, there's the merchandising aspect, and then there's also the promotional aspect. Are we offering a discount in that store? So often that is a way that we see new consumers coming in. And based on that survey research that we have, 80% of Ripple customers return to Ripple. So if we can make that sale at a deep discount, we're usually going to get them back. So that's the other sort of calculation. Those are the things that we weigh against, are we going to pay for the shelf space? Are we going to pay for the shelf space in tandem with promotion? It just really depends on the store, the location, the customers, and then how they're willing to work with us. It is individualized, even within the chains where we may have 10, 15 stores, it is an individualized approach to each shop.
My brain is exploding. You don't have to maybe say explicit numbers if you don't want to, but I'm curious, how many dispensaries are you in? Because
So
that's like, how do you manage all of those relationships, all those touch points?
it's 300 plus.
Shit.
And to something you mentioned earlier, it's not all SKUs. So where we have, I'm going to throw a number out, I think 11 SKUs right now, some have two, some have all, some have five, and it's mixing and matching depending on what they think will work for their customer base, what they like best, what their bud tenders like best. So yeah, it's hundreds of stores, and then
Interesting.
however many product combinations that is. I cannot do that fast math.
No, you're good. This is not a math show, don't worry. But it is an
But
interesting, just kind of like line in the sand to kind of understand the diligence, and like you said earlier, your foot has to constantly be on the gas, because I can imagine if you, let's say, pay attention to this chain too much and not to this chain, I'm sure there's some competition and also just opportunity for maybe a competitor to you to come in and take a meeting with somebody. And it's just like you're constantly trying to kind of, stay top of mind, which is a really big theme that I resonate a lot with. And I try to speak on as much as I can, because people want to overcomplicate marketing. They think they need to have these huge budgets. And yes, I think if you have like $1 million to spend, your brand is going to be everywhere. And so by, just sheer volume, yes, you will have brand awareness and brand presence and sales, but consistency and just, beating the drum. And that to me is really where I think brands can find the most success for the long play in this industry, is just by having some sort of plan. I don't think the plan obviously has to be the same, not that you're talking to the same dispensary every day or having the same, conversations, or maybe you are just like, variations depending on who you're talking to. But it is kind of like a very proactive, you have to be aggressive in this market and in this industry to exist and to survive. And so I think earlier you said too, it's like not everything is like, thriving or like going to be like super successful. And I think that's a myth that I love dispelling, not to discourage people from the industry, but just to be really realistic. If you can't tell, if anybody's listening who's new here, I like to just be blunt and call it what it is, because I do believe that we can all learn together. I do believe that there's a lot to go around. But with that said, I know that we were talking a little bit too about just Colorado in general. And so I don't know if you want to touch on just kind of the Colorado marketplace. What are your observations from being in the industry as long as you have been? How has Colorado as a state evolved? Has it become more friendly to do business? Do you find there are new consumers constantly coming online? Do you feel like the impact of your surrounding states like Arizona and New Mexico going online is impacting sales? And just kind of like things in that vein, I'm just curious, to hear from your perspective. Again, I think people glorify cannabis and they glorify the industry and they give a lot of credit to Colorado being this legacy state, and all those things are true, but also this is the reality of operating in the industry. And so real talk, how has it been surviving, this last decade?
So thankful that we are here today. It's rough. So Colorado right now, I believe the industry as a whole is down 20 something percent in terms of year over year sales. Now, it makes sense in that we had this huge spike during COVID times because we were deemed an essential business and people were super stressed out. So everybody turning to cannabis, legacy state, people knew what they were getting. The other states coming online has taken a lot of business away from those border towns. where we usually saw spikes in sales. And then also, you know, with hemp derived cannabinoids, hemp derived THC coming online, and people finding different avenues to get their cannabis products, I think Colorado has taken a hit, but you know, I've also heard and seen signs that we're going to level out and everybody's going to kind of go back to where they were, just kind of churning. But so many people look at cannabis and see this, see a gold rush, see money. And that's just not what people are operating in. You know, I've heard a lot of reports of shops waiting to pay vendors until they get money in. You know, it's money in, money out. And it is super tough to see because we are an essential business. We are part of the fabric of Colorado. And I think that if we all can hang on long enough to sort of see it level out, that we're going to be fine. But it's just, you know, COVID being what it was, and then everything else that has sort of happened in tandem, and, you know, pending recession, or are we in a recession? It's hit consumers' pockets. We just dropped the price of all of our Ripple products so that hopefully people can still afford them. And you know, we really, like I said, to start this all out, we're happy that we're here, that we get to survive another day.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately the reality of business, right? I think people neglect to put cannabis in the same lens as any other industry being impacted by some of these external forces. But then you do have the volatility of being a cannabis business that adds more complexity when you have states that perhaps didn't have legal markets now have legal markets, and consumers maybe don't have to drive 5 hours. They can just drive 1 hour or 30 minutes. And so it's just the accessibility of these products, I think, is shaking things out. Do you, maybe not do you, what is like leveling out to you? Like, do you see regulations or restrictions on how many operators there are? Like, would that help leveling out? Like, you look at some states like Oklahoma where they're just a free for all. And I have so many friends brands and they're struggling to survive because you really have to be the brand that that consumer is picking. And so it's like, does a state like Colorado that has been existing for so long in this way look at it like, hey, maybe we gave out too many licenses. Like, maybe we don't need as many. Like, is there a way to cap how many people are doing edibles, for example? But then you reflect on that with kind of like the food conversation. Capitalism, fight to the finish. Like, who's the best beverage or who's the best candy bar? And so it kind of makes you more, you know, how do you stay competitive and get your brand out there and kind of those things. So I'm just curious, like, in a perfect world, what does that leveling out of the market look like for you?
I mean, for us, it's consistency in seasonality. So understanding, you know, what our revenues are, being able to forecast, being able to plan for things. I think, you know, even though Colorado has been rec for as long as it has, we are still learning new things. And to go back to something I mentioned very early on, the industry hasn't grown as quickly as we anticipated that it would, in terms of the customer, in terms of the people who are frequenting dispensaries and the people who are still afraid to go into a dispensary. I think that's something that I sort of grapple with every day, is that it should be a grocery store. It should be able to be sold like alcohol. Um, we had a horrid experience at a wedding expo years ago. It was early 2018, where there was an alcohol vendor across from us giving samples, and we were just there to represent the brand. It was the T brand at the time. And somebody called the cops on us and said that we were giving out infused product, and somebody got sick. We had cupcakes from a local store, these little mini cupcakes,
Oh my
just because we wanted people to come chat with us. And meanwhile, there is a vendor across from us giving out alcohol. And I just, it pains me every day to see that there's a liquor store on every corner,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, go in as you wish. And cannabis is still this like severely restricted thing that people are not dying from. It's not hurting people. And
That's
I think that
fucking crazy.
it's a whole other thing,
It's like
but
them,
I
they're the
think
bad ones.
but I think that sort of plays into it is,
For sure.
there still is that stigma because it is so isolated, because it is so regulated. It's like, oh, that must be bad. Like you have to show your ID to go into that store. And the kids can't go into that store. It's bad stuff. Meanwhile, it's all behind a counter. It's all in child resistant containers. And there just needs to be some merging of cannabis and general grocery. Cannabis and, or cannabis like alcohol, something that brings it forward as opposed to keeping it as this like lock and key thing. Um, yeah, I've totally lost track of what I was saying.
No, that
Other
was a great thought. That was a good thought. I think it is the question was, what is like leveling out? What does normalcy
oh,
to you?
so yeah, so that seasonality, like the way that you can plan in general CPG,
Sure.
you know when your spikes are, you know when you're going into holidays, when you're going into summer or 420, whatever the season may be, the holiday may be, you can plan for it. We can't plan for anything, at least not
No.
well. And there's the saying, make plans and God laughs. Like that is cannabis. It's just trying to figure out how we keep the wheels on the bus and how we make moves thoughtfully. Every day it's a consideration of, does this make sense? Will this make sense? If it doesn't, how can we walk back easily?
No, that is a beautiful sentiment. I think that that needs to be like placard like everywhere just so people can like fully absorb it, acknowledge it, face it every day. And, it's not to make light of it either, but it's like you have to become comfortable with the uncomfortability. And this is the nature of the game. And just your thoughts are making me think again, just in this mass scheme of what is legalization at a federal level, like what are we all kind of fighting for or anticipating? And it is really remarkable when you have a state like Colorado that was so isolated for so many years as this, you know, green, I hate using the term like green rush from a like business perspective, but the green rush, like consumers, they
Mm-hmm.
were rushing to Colorado, not just for the beautiful Rocky Mountains, but because you could get high and go skiing. It was awesome. That was me like every winter for the last like 10 years. But now that you have these states surrounding, not mine though, definitely not mine anytime soon, turning online, that just shows until you do have parity with every state, having some offering. Like I think people don't fully realize there are dry counties in California. I'm sure Colorado has
Yep.
some. I think Colorado Springs I think used to be dry. I think they've
It
changed.
still
It's
is.
still dry.
They should be coming online, but still.
Colorado Springs, one of my favorite places to see. Love those Garden of the Gods. And yeah, always had to go to Manitou.
Go to
Couldn't
the
go to Colorado.
zoo.
Yes. I had to get creative. But the point is, right, you have cities or municipalities that maybe didn't want to adopt full cannabis accessibility, but the state had it. And so I think until you see every state having some access to cannabis, it's going to be this volatility just kind of sucking and pulling resources in different directions. Like we spent a lot of time in New Mexico. My fiance is doing some cultivation work over there, and that market just went online in April, and they're like, "Oh, we're $4 billion." And I'm like, "Give it 2 years, like just wait, it's gonna level out." And I think it's exciting for the brands and the businesses who are taking advantage of the spike, right? But it's not a true expression of what that industry is going to be like. And so I agree. I think that that would be a nice thing to have for us all who are trying to exist in this ecosystem, just to like know, like as you said, hey, 420 is coming up. We know that's going to be, a significant holiday. But on that note, I think for us on our side, even from a hemp, CBD, but very much hemp Delta 9 THC, as you're talking about industry, we saw a decline on not I wouldn't say decline, but we didn't see as much of a spike on 420. And I think those are then indicated of external forces like what's happening with our economy and just other
Mm-hmm.
world events that are impacting, the wallet and the bottom line for the consumers who are putting these products in their cart. So it's a very dynamic, not a one size fits all kind of approach to it. But I had kind of one, maybe two final questions. I wanted to circle back around. You were talking about because of the economy impacting the dollar for the consumer, you've lowered prices. You mentioned earlier also talking about promotions. I'm curious how you approach promotions. Are you able to do things maybe you can't sell direct to consumer, but can you do a mailer to people in a particular neighborhood? Like, where are the boundaries of how you get coupons or promotions? Is it all through the dispensaries? And kind of how do you approach that? Because I imagine that is, like you said, if you can make the initial purchase more palpable on the front end, that person will, like you said, 80% be a Ripple customer ongoing. So knowing that's the data, like how do you lean into that? I'd be doing coupons everywhere. I'd be like, you're the grocery store, like littering people's cars. And is that legal to do with some of the cannabis regulations? Because I know we have a harder time than just other businesses.
Yes, but so we would love to blanket coupon, but going back to the dispensaries being all individualized, they all have different point of sale systems. So they have to use their own couponing system.
Nightmare.
So if you want a coupon, you can do it with potentially a chain. We tried direct mail years ago. It was one of the very first things that we tried because we were trying to look at cannabis as a general marketplace, and all of the same marketing rules apply. And we made sure that we had a list that was 21 plus. We were targeting seniors with the tea product, and we were sending them to one dispensary. It was one of our very first dispensaries that had agreed to do the promotion with us. And they had no fewer than 3 people call and complain that they had received this piece of direct mail. And why were we selling them, or why were they selling them drugs? Which was fascinating. And, this was back in 2016. And as far as promotions, again, much easier to do with a chain that has a bunch of stores. A lot of shops have their own promotional schedule. So they'll do something like Munchie Monday, Tasty Tuesday. And so we'll try to get on board on that. And sometimes it's a pay to play, sometimes it's product, credit, whatever it may be. And other times we will approach stores and say, hey, we have a promotion we'd love to run for the summer. We recently, in what month are we in? We're in August. Last month, my kids went back to school today. So in my mind, it is September because I grew up in the Midwest where you go to school after Labor Day. You go back to school. My kids started today. Oh. So in my mind, it's September, but August.
I understand.
Last month, we did a limited edition July 4th label. We partnered with Color of Cannabis here in Colorado, and we were trying to run promotions around that label. So it was on our Pure 10 SKU because that's our best-selling SKU, which is just pure THC. We had it wrapped. We had a local artist do the artwork for it, and we're trying to get that out there to the consumer so we can place table tents. We can try to run an individualized promotion with the store so that people have a discount on the Ripple product. But again, you're dealing with 300 plus stores because most all of those stores carry the Ripple Pure SKU, and trying to figure out, within the sales reps and the field sales specialists that we have, how we get coverage on those. Because you can't run a promotion and then let it sit. You have to have people in the shop. We have to be doing vendor days. We have to have materials to let people know if the store is not letting people know that, hey, this product is on promo, this product is on sale. So anything and everything, but who knows at this point?
No, that's very helpful to just kind of like grasp, I think, just to put it in perspective, right? Again, I think my whole intention with these conversations is to obviously highlight brands so that people become familiar with them, but also they become inspired by what you're doing. And again, I think imitation is the biggest form of flattery. So it's like you can recreate everything that we are talking about, but like good luck to them because it takes, your uniqueness, your proprietary information, how you approach things to like execute on the cylinders that you're executing, which is why I'm a big believer of sharing as bluntly and as transparently as I can. And I always appreciate when my guests do the same. But it's wild to fathom in a market like this where you are so reliant upon other people for the success of your brand. You don't have the luxury of saying, okay, I want to do coupons or I want to do a promotion. How long does it take you to, let's say, execute this idea, especially when you're talking about labeling and packaging of a particular product? You're like, okay, we want to do this label and packaging for July. Like, when did you start to pull the artists together? Do you do labels in-house? Like, how does that component come together? And then what's the timeline with like that in the dispensary of like, okay, we're going to do this promotion and we're going to need to get you the new products in your stores. And then we're going to set up all these touch points of vendor days and education and blah, blah, blah. And obviously it's just like, I just want to understand like that ecosystem of,
Mhm.
we want to do a new label, we want to do a promotion. Like, how does that even work for you guys?
Yeah, so it's anywhere from 4 to 6 months on our end, and it
Okay.
depends on who we're partnering. We like to do give backs as part of limited edition labels to have more of a reason for them to exist, not just something novel and fun. So securing that partner, securing an artist, having the labels printed. So we don't print in-house. We have designers in-house, but we don't print in-house. And so that can take anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, depending on if we're getting physical proofs of product. Then we actually have to wrap and fill those bottles in house. So we're usually giving a month to production to make sure that we have inventory to then be able to send out and to try to hit the timelines, knowing this was a July 4th label. So, we don't want it sitting on shelves in October, but we also don't want it on shelves in May. We want to try to hit the season of it, try to produce enough so that they're not sitting and we're not running through them too quickly. So yeah, it usually takes us about 4 to 6 months to concept it. And then the sales team is probably out there at least 2 months in advance, running the idea by the stores, letting them know that it's happening, giving them all of the materials, and taking requests from shops who are super excited about it. All of the shops would eventually get it just because of how the sales cycles work, but we want to give priority to the shops that want to promote it. And yeah, it's a lot of sort of individual conversations again of, hey, we're doing this thing. Would you like to get on board? We'll put you on the list.
So I bet you're working on holiday things right now, or they should have already been started.
We just yeah, well, so we fall is printed in the bag,
Nice.
ready to go out. So yeah, we're
Nice.
gonna start in on Thanksgiving.
Oh, very good. Do y'all ever do any, like, do you play into like the pumpkin spice flavor?
That is the fall campaign. It's
Nice.
infusing your own pumpkin spice. It looks very fall inspired.
Nice.
Uh, I have joked for far too long, and it hasn't come to existence yet, that we need a pumpkin spice quick stick flavor,
Yes.
because in gummy form it just feels a little weird, but as something you pour on your tongue, it's a little more fun.
Oh yeah, I think
We
it could work.
Yeah, we had an instant coffee for a while called Clockwork
Mm.
Coffee. So around that time, I was thinking that we could have a pumpkin spice mix in, and that would be really fun. But yeah, for Thanksgiving, it's huge for us because you can make your whole feast into an edible using Ripple. So we have a lot of fun with all the ways to use Ripple with Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun holiday to take advantage of, especially for the nature of your products. But this conversation has been super insightful for me. I really appreciate your candid nature of just speaking from your heart about the realities of operating your brand. And I encourage everybody who's listening to please go connect with you guys. If you're in Colorado, go check out their products, try them yourselves. I wasn't joking. I think the last time I was in Colorado, I bought some of the Ripple dissolver packs, and I stuff them in my purse, and it's always like a pleasant surprise, like, oh, I do have an edible on me. Like, great. So I really, really have grown up loving your products and just grateful to have an opportunity to have you on the podcast. So thanks for the time and information today.
Thank you, Shayda. It's been a pleasure on my end as well.